you love butter, you love bacon, you love cheese, you love grease, you love onions. Oh, that was a yes, please, if there ever was one. That food hack.
Radio Free Intimate, episode 347. About to cover a band that I know quite a few people have wanted me to talk about for quite a while. You see, when I first started doing this Radio Free Intimate thing and covering a lot of the obscure black metal stuff, 3 bands, or I guess more accurately, projects, bodies of work, unholy oeuvres were brought to my attention that I had been unaware of. Those being Vothana, Totale Vernichtung, or more broadly, all of the various and sundry projects that Anti-Messiah has played guitar for, like Totale Vernichtung, Vicarious Filii Dei, and Rost Orchestra, and Grausamkeit, who will be the subject of this new episode. Now, I myself was kind of surprised that I hadn't heard of any of these groups when they were first brought to my attention by the internet, but I got to thinking about it, and it made sense for Vothana, because that guy had a whole bunch of demos that, like, 10 people total had heard, put out in the early 2000s, and then he just kind of stopped for a while until he came back at the latter end of the 2010s and the early 2020s when he started finally putting out full-length albums that were easily available. So if the first episode of Radio Free Innsmouth was the one that's on episode 1 of The Hate Bus, which came out in 2017, middle of November, it makes sense that I probably became familiar with Vothana shortly after most of Vothana's modern-day fan base found out about him. In the case of Totale Vernichtung and Vicarious Filii Dei, most of that stuff came out during the 2010s, an era of black metal which I admittedly had a pretty big blind spot with because I just assumed it was all pretty bad.
Well, it stinks.
With a couple of exceptions, so it makes sense I would have missed him on the first go-around. But Grausamkeit? Apparently, this project has existed since 1994, which made me kind of go, huh? Like, how is there an old-school German black metal project that I didn't know about? I've been listening to Moonblood since I was a really young kid. Been listening to Absurd almost as long. I've even spent years listening to stuff like Coven of the Worm, Murka, Thanor, the real obscure stuff. So where the heck did this band come from? This better not be one of those.
Yeah, I was pen pals with Vag from Burzum when I was 9 years old. I actually invented black metal in 1989. That was me. Be sure to buy this shirt that I jerked off into on eBay. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to burning extra copies I had of a couple Graveland albums for some reason. Und Klauschitznausen.
How embarrassing.
Nargaroth type situations, like something smells fishy right here. Luckily, for the quality of this episode, and for the quality of my own listening experience, after having spent several years going through pretty much all the Grausamkeit stuff, I can state with assured confidence that this project actually is for real, and a lot of it is really good stuff. I can think of 3 pretty good reasons why Grausamkeit didn't come to my attention in my formative black metal years. The first one being, yeah, it's from 1994, but it's like mega obscure, even compared to stuff like Thanor or Moonblood. There was probably like 10 guys listening to these demos back in the day, and amazingly, a lot of people that did stuff like that back then don't tend to be very internet savvy, but they do eventually show up on the internet, and they're probably looking around at people hyping up whatever flavor of the month type stuff, and they're just shaking their heads like,
on that fucking mouth shut.
Let me show you kiddies what some real black metal sounds like. And so they actually go about uploading all the Grausamkeit stuff to the internet. Factor number 2. A lot of Grausamkeit's material really straddles the boundaries between black metal and what we now know as dungeon synth. But it's from a time way before anybody used the term dungeon synth. It's back when that was just, the weird synthesizer thing some black metal guys like that Burzum fella do. Some kind of dark wave, I don't really know. Nowadays, dungeon synth is pretty hot on the internet, so it follows that older stuff that can be retroactively put into that style would experience something of an online resurgence. And of course, there is factor
number 3.
Andreas Bettinger, alias Black Son of Darkness, the guy behind all the Grausamkeit material, is wacky for even a black metal band. He's been in and out of jail a lot. Famously, he has 147 offenses on his police record, 1 for assault, 1 for incitement to hatred, oh god.
That's crazy!
And the other 145 are all for which makes for a fun story told around the black metal campfire, but doesn't really do wonders in terms of PR for actually getting your music out there. So given all that tomfoolery, as well as the fact that there's something like 40 different Grausamkeit releases to pick from, is it even worth digging into this stuff? After several years of pretty exhaustive listening to most of what BSOD has put out, I gotta say, yeah, a lot of it's pretty sick. Definitely well worth your time if you're into the rawer, weirder end of black metal. And he's actually made it a lot easier for people nowadays because he's set up a Bandcamp with pretty decent quality tape rips of those old demos available for your listening pleasure. Plus it's spread all around the internet. Where to start? My personal favorite release from Grausamkeit gotta be 1999's Stardust, which even on its original album cover is a pretty potent mission statement of what Grausamkeit's all about. You got a swastika made out of cocaine, or at least that's what it looks like to me. He actually redid it for the Bandcamp release so he didn't get kicked off the platform, making that 666 spinny thing you see on all those Deicide albums. This release provides a pretty comprehensive overview of what you can expect from Grausamkeit, with much better than average, for Grausamkeit that is, production value. You've got some downright beautiful sounding dungeon synth stuff going on in this album that then takes a turn for the dark as the black metal slowly creeps in right here. And when that black metal does show up, there's a heavy emphasis on catchy riffs, which actually play off the melodies introduced during the dungeon synth section of the song. Speaking of said synthesizer, it doesn't go away after the intro of the song. It's there pretty much the whole time, kind of intertwining with the guitars, cranking out some stuff that's very catchy, especially for such an admittedly raw sounding and alienated sort of band. As you're hearing in this transition riff set right here, there's a lot of sort of heavy metal, black metal stuff a la Bathory. That seems to be a common feature of a lot of the raw German black metal stuff. Thonor, Moonblood, Absurd, they all did this kind of thing. And Grausamkeit has a uniquely dark take on it, almost incorporating a little bit of a thrash edge at times with the palmutes. And given that there is that heavy metal influence, despite the fact that he's a drugged out maniac, this guy does a really good job of writing memorable parts that flow together very well, whether it be this little keyboard bit or the responding melodic guitar riffage that we got going on right here. I mean, as far as raw ultra cult black metal goes, this is some of the catchiest and easiest to follow of the genre, particularly compared to something like Branicald or Vothana, which might be another reason this guy's music got really big recently, with a lot more new people coming into the black metal sphere. Most of Grausamkeit's material exists on a spectrum.
I said, lady, I have autism, leave me alone.
With one end being almost purely dungeon synth, and the other end almost being purely black metal. A good example of the latter would be 1997's Angel Destruction demo, which at least to my ears is by far his most Moonblood sounding release, both with its heavy emphasis on these blistering, quick melodic tremolo riffs, as well as his contrasting incorporation of more mid-paced, epic sounding, almost black metal version of Manowar, certainly very Bathory style thing, going on during the album's more laid back portions. There's also a lot of quasi-folky melodic guitar over the top of everything. This transition section here again showing off his talent for very memorable songwriting. There's also another pleasant similarity with Moonblood going on here. That being the vocals, which are extremely well done and very far removed from your standard depressive, suicidal, one-man bedroom black metal goose honking noises. You hear that? It's properly malefic sounding, none of that
I live in the Bronx!
type shit going on, for which we should all be thankful. We should also be thankful for the awesome melodic lead guitar I mentioned earlier. About to kick it into high gear as this song goes into a bit more of a doomy mode, with the melodic lead guitar acting to kind of stitch together these waves of blackened guitar fuzz, sort of doing this continually unfolding melodic sort of thing. Almost reminiscent of Amorphous' Tales from the Thousand Lakes from a certain point of view. Very much a melodic staircase sort of riff, and again, surprisingly brainy and surprisingly catchy for something you'd expect to be rather deranged. That's the kind of stuff you can expect from the pure black metal, minimal synth end of the spectrum when it comes to Grausamkeit's style of songwriting. Then you got stuff in the middle that pretty much 50-50 balances dungeon synthiness and epic heavy black metalness, like 1996's fucking Goat Horness demo does. This one's another very Moonblood sounding one. I feel like these guys must have written to each other at least once back in the day, even though they're on opposite sides of the country. Grausamkeit's over in Saarland, Moonblood's way over in Saxony, but they sound pretty darn similar, in a good way. I'm always glad when I hear somebody that sounds like Moonblood that does a good job of it.
아, 이거는 못 고르지.
Don't worry, the dungeon synth's coming. See, look, there it is. You just gotta be patient, which is also a really good descriptor for this particular style of songwriting. Very gradually unfolding stuff. Going into another nice Moonblood style, Bathory style, whatever the fuck, black metal, heavy metal sort of riff, with very well done, catchy construction of memorable vocal patterns, to which then BSOD proceeds to add a healthy layering of more medieval sounding dungeon synth, kind of expanding the sound outwards. If Moonblood somehow morphed into a symphonic black metal band during their mid-90s heyday, they probably would have ended up sounding a whole lot like this particular style of Grausamkeit. Then at the far end of the spectrum, you got stuff where the emphasis is almost entirely on the synths in terms of moving the song forward, with the guitars really just functioning as vectors for texture. Best example of this style would be the Pink Green 666 demo from 1997.
그 제가 V앱을 너무 안 한다고.
Yeah, I don't know what a Pink Green 666 is myself either. If I had to guess, it's probably got something to do with my pills now. Whatever that pink green nonsense is, this particular demo is all about the keyboards. There's also a surprising degree of instrumental separation going on, with very audible bass guitar and almost danceable sort of drums, often resulting in a rather frenzied feeling. At least until the music slows down, and then it entirely just leans into those synths, resulting in something with a whole lot of atmosphere. I feel like this kind of stuff definitely laid the ground for some of the weirder dungeon synth influenced black metal of today. That Grindstone Records, Old Nick stuff, though I'm sure that guy probably doesn't support Grausamkeit's political proclivities.
Oh, I see nothing. I was not here. I did not even get up this morning.
There's a major emphasis on shifting textures and unexpected transitions. Like that one right there with the weird drum roll and whatnot. The songs that Grausamkeit writes in this style also tend to be a bit longer in runtime, to account for the fact that he needs time to let all of these different changes flow into each other and all these weird themes to unfold. So there's a basic overview of what Grausamkeit's about. If you're looking to get into Grausamkeit, I would recommend any of the releases I've showcased so far, as well as the Christenschmähung Hellgoat and Nostalgia Occultus Blut albums. From there, you can dig further if you want. A lot of it gets pretty gosh darn raw, as you would expect, even compared to the stuff I've already played. But it's there for you if it sounds interesting. But no discussion of BSOD's Grausamkeit work would be complete without mentioning the fact that he has a billion other projects. I mean, you got Pure Evil, Weltentod, Anger of Gods, Auxcult, Blasphemia, Corneus, Dolenstorm, Ebola Zaire,
Fegefeuer, Fluch der Zerstörung, Germania, Goatsperm, Grabschändung, Grotteufel, Jew Atomizer. Musical RC composition, Nephos, Opferduch, Satanic Overdose, War Hornets, Finsternis, Birkeman, Dethroned, General Spirits.
That's a lot of names.
The big one that most people seem to talk about is Corneus, probably because he's got a demo called Visions of Hitler, where he's holding a gun and wearing a witch hat, looking all wacky. Most of what I heard of this project sounds like an even rawer and stranger version of the kind of stuff he'd do with Grausamkeit, heavier focus on ambient grinding.
앞머리 안 자를 거예요.
Look, I told you this was raw. It makes Ildjarn sound like Doom of Borgir. It makes Wold sound like Cradle of Filth. And yet, honestly, particularly during these synth-led sections of the music, I feel like there's a decent amount of interesting stuff going on here. And he utilizes that noisy aesthetic to craft some interesting tunes. But it's definitely not for everybody. And I would very much recommend familiarizing yourself with most of the Grausamkeit stuff before diving into Corneus, unless you're particularly deranged.
I believe the common denominator of the universe is not harmony, but chaos, hostility, and murder.
Another one people seem to bring up a lot is Jew Atomizer, because holy shit, that band name. This one's also obviously very raw, but not quite as crazy as Cornelius is. It really sounds like he's taking the odd sense of melody that fueled Grausamkeit, as well as the ambient synthscape type stuff, and applying it to a much more hostile kind of Zyklon B, Niden Division 187, Uranium-235 sort of thing. It strays into melodic territory, but then it does this. With the weird clean vocals, almost sounding like your speakers are possessed. Then it goes full on blackened stench grind or some shit before completely collapsing into some watery sort of strange ambience. After which the guitars do come back in, but they start doing this weird sort of doomy thing. Musically, this project's all over the place. The common denominator is that it is extremely hateful sounding. And I believe this is the project that got him in trouble for hate speech as opposed to getting him in trouble for the drug usage stuff. Speaking of that front, the most bizarrely named project that he's got going, the one that you won't find on Metal Archives, Heroin Makes Happy. The fuck kind of name is that?
Make everybody happy.
Despite the goofy name, this is actually one of my favorite side projects it has. This particular song, Geiermeyer, off of the It's Not Too Late to Say Yes to H demo from the year 2000, kind of sounding like if the guy from the Berserker decided to take up Dungeon Synth. It's real frenzied and just crazy sounding, and despite not having typical black metal ingredients, it has a real black metal feeling to it during parts like this. You got the blast beats all over the place, the sweeping keyboard arpeggios. It feels like black metal guitars are there, even though they're actually not. But then it transitions into more doomy material, with again almost sort of a dark, folkish feeling to it. It's hard to describe, but it's uniquely evil sounding. If there's such a thing as suicidal depressive dungeon synth, this shit might be it, except it's less depressive and more just ominous, cosmic in scope, appropriate for a project clearly inspired by getting incredibly fucked up on illicit narcotics. If you were going to grab anything from the Grausamkeit guy's other projects, honestly, I'd suggest Heroin Makes Happy. However, my personal favorite sort of side release that he did is Opferdolk's 1995 demo, Grabgestank. This is a uniquely minimalist, sort of weird, almost rehearsal sounding release. Very heavy on atmosphere, and it reminds me a lot if a black metal band was to attempt covering Mortis's Cuntecele Diavolui side project, particularly once the synths kick in. It's this uniquely satanic sounding, sort of danceable yet alienated ghost of a goth rock band coming back to life. I'm willing to bet a lot of people, if they heard this, would think it sucks. I don't think it sucks, though. I think it's actually super fucking interesting, and I've been listening to this album a whole lot. This is a relatively early BSOD release, and it's probably the closest he ever comes to displaying something like youthful enthusiasm and optimism in a very twisted sort of way, of course. Really like these palm-muted riffs here. And then, of course, the keyboards kick back in. This is good stuff. Like a lot of the BSOD releases, it's surprisingly good. Maybe it's not so surprising. I don't know. It seems like this guy puts out a lot of really interesting shit despite his wacky lifestyle choices, or perhaps because of those. And also, surprisingly enough, dude's still around. Like, he's still alive, and he still puts out new material. His Pure Evil side project actually did a split with Werewolf from Satanic Warmaster a few years back, and he's even been putting out new Grausamkeit material. And it's not like he's just repeating old past glories either. He's doing new stuff with the Grausamkeit style. A lot of it's taken on more of a dirtier, almost punk feeling at times. Fittingly enough, he actually covered some punk-era Darkthrone stuff on this particular release. But I find the original material on it to be a lot more intellectually stimulating and unique sounding. It's maybe not as raw or as heavy on the dungeon synth as one might expect, but I feel like it definitely upholds the spirit of older Grausamkeit material, as well as some of the weirder territory he explored with Heroin Makes Happy and Cornelius. Quite a bit of the material has sort of a depressive rock a la Bethlehem or even Catatonia vibe to it, and he brings back the wacky clean vocals from some of his side projects, as well as that sort of winding melodic lead guitar that was a big part of a lot of the mid-90s Grausamkeit material. It'd be interesting to see where he takes this project going forward. Most recent interview I read with the guy, I believe he said he was going back into jail again, so it might be a bit.
Who knows?
So there you go, a little bit of a primer on one of the most mysterious and strange black metal projects out there, Grausamkeit. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed learning said something. But even if you didn't, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I'll see you next time.
Think about it though, Tony. Weight loss.
AIDS? Nobody's got AIDS.